at transport in animals, we look at heart diseases and blood vessels. So quickly, how exercise affects the heart. So heart activities can be monitored using an ECG. Take note first. An ECG is used to measure the pulse rate. An ECG is used to measure the pulse rate or listening to sound of valves using a stethoscope. Using a stethoscope to listening to the sound of valves, and it's used to measure the pulse rate. Now, heart rate and pulse rate is measured in beats per minute, BPM. Now, to investigate the effect of exercise on heart rate, you need to record the pulse rate at rest for a minute. Immediately after they do some exercise, you record the pulse rate every minute until it returns to the resting rate. Now, this experiment will show that during exercise, the heart rate increases and may take several minutes to return to normal. So exercise affects how fast the heart rate beats. So we'll now look at how exercise affects it. So this is the beating of the heart. And take note, these are coronary arteries that supply the heart muscles, the cardiac muscles of the heart with nutrient and oxygen. So why does the heart rate increases during exercise? The major reason is so that sufficient blood is taken to the working muscles to provide them with enough nutrient and oxygen for increased respiration, because during exercise you need energy. So if you need energy, that means your muscles need high amount of um, nutrient. So this energy you can get them when sufficient blood is taken to the working muscles in the human system, because the muscles help to transport this nutrient and oxygen. So once you get to the muscles, it diffuses into the mitochondria, and at that point, that is where respiration will now take place. So an increase in heart rate also allow for waste product to be removed at a faster rate, because as respiration takes place, that means more carbon dioxide will be produced, and if not removed faster, it will lower the blood pH, because it will now form carbonic acid to lower the pH of the blood, which is not healthy, and because it will form a high concentration of lactic acid. Now, following exercise, the heart continues to beat faster for a while to ensure that all the excess waste products are removed from the muscle cells. Now, it is also likely that muscle cells have been respiring anaerobically during exercise, and so that's led to a buildup of oxygen depth. So this need to be repaid following exercise, and so the heart continues to beat faster to ensure that extra oxygen is still being delivered to muscle cells. So what could be used for? The extra oxygen is used to break down lactic acid that was built up during exercise in cells as a result of anaerobic respiration during the exercise process. So, if you want to know more about this oxygen depth, you need to study gas exchange and respiration. So, if you go through the topic, you now understand how this is done fully. Now, coronary heart disease. So, you see, like I stated earlier here, the heart is made up of muscles called cardiac muscles that need their own supply of blood to deliver oxygen, glucose, and other nutrients, and remove carbon dioxide and other waste products. Now, the blood is supplied by the coronary arteries. So if you look at the heart here, you find out that you see blood vessels on top of the muscles here. Those are coronary uh, arteries. Now, if the coronary artery become partially or completely blocked by fatty deposit called plaque, so you see, these are fatty deposit now called plaque. So as it deposit, it blocks the coronary arteries and makes the blood to clot. Now, mainly formed from cholesterol, that is high fat food with high fat content. The arteries are not as elastic as they should be, and therefore cannot stretch to accommodate the blood which is being forced through them, leading to coronary heart disease. Now, partial blockage of the coronary arteries creates a restricted blood flow. So you see, blood will not be able to pass through to the lower part, to this lower part. So you expect that this lower part will have less nutrient and less oxygen. So the muscles that they supply will begin to die out. Restricted blood flow to the cardiac muscle cells and result in severe chest pain called angina. Now, complete blockage means cells in that area of the heart will not be able to respire and can no longer contract, leading to heart attack. So, this is just meant to describe the process. Now, in a normal artery, blood is flowing to all other parts freely, but once there is a buildup of plague as a result of buildup of plague as a result of high cholesterol content. What will happen is the blood will no longer be able to flow freely, as you can see here, because of this buildup of plague and fatty deposit. So areas that are found within this section of the heart that's supposed to supply this part of the heart muscles will begin to die out because there is not enough nutrient and oxygen supply to them. Okay, so this diagram simply is just everything. So you can just pause it and look at it. So this is the coronary artery. This is the plaque that is being built up. So as a result, there will be no enough supply of blood to all other parts because it will now make it less elastic. So looking at factors that increases the risk of coronary heart disease comes out. What are those factors? One, poor diet. So if your high level of cholesterol and saturated fatty acid in the blood will lead to coronary heart disease. So poor diet, poor lifestyle, that's smoking, lack of exercise, and stress are also factors that can lead to coronary heart disease. So take note, poor lifestyle such as smoking, lack of exercise and stress, and genetic factors. So being male, having a family history of heart disease. So there's high possibility of you having it too. So what are the ways to reduce the risks of heart disease? Take note, the ways to reduce the risks of heart disease is different from the ways to prevent it. When you have preventive and treatment measure, that means you already have it. So how will you treat it? But in this case, ways to prevent it from even happening. So ways to reduce the risks. That means you reduce fatty acid and cholesterol. High food may decrease the buildup of plaque. So you reduce the eating of fatty acid and cholesterol. Now, regular exercise. This will help with weight loss, and it will help to decrease blood pressure and cholesterol level will reduce. Now, avoid smoking as nicotine content in cigarette smoke can damage blood vessels and increase blood pressure. So, how do you treat coronary heart disease? First, you take a drug called aspirin. Now, aspirin seems to help stop blood clots forming, which could block the artery. So, it helps to prevent blood clots. Now, the other method are strictly surgical method, and it includes angioplasty. Is a special cable is passed through the narrow artery and inflated to widen the artery. Now it is used to insert a metal cage tube. So you see, when you insert it, you now use it to install a metal cage tube. Now this metal cage tube, which is known as a stent extension, will now help to prevent the coronary artery from collapsing again. So it will leave it open for proper blood flow. Then the next is coronary artery bypass operation, where a piece of blood vessel is taken from the patient's leg, arm, chest, and is used to create a new passage for the flow of blood to the cardiac muscles, bypassing the blocked artery. So if you look at this, if this part of the artery is blocked, so you can use a bypass graft to bypass it, the blocked part to the new part. So blood flow can still take place. So you see, this is another bypass because this part here might be blocked, might have coronary heart disease, so you bypass it. So bypass operations. So the next aspect we're looking at now is blood and lymphatic vessels. So here, let's look at the simply the blood vessels. So blood vessels, there are three main types of blood vessels. We have the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. So arteries are large vessels which carry blood away from the heart. So they take blood away from the heart, while capillaries are tiny tubes which deliver blood um, to body cells. So, and veins carry blood towards the heart. So, if you look at this, this is the arteries. It takes blood away from the heart, and the arteries is divided into smaller vessels called arterials. Then they are from the arterials to capillaries, which are one cell thick to deliver blood to cells. From the capillaries, it moves to venous, from venous to your vein, and veins back to the heart. So you can see that the veins here also have valves, but the artery do not. So let's just look at how they individually adapt to their functions. Arteries carries blood at high pressure away from the heart. Now it carries oxygenated blood other than the pulmonary arteries. So all arteries carry oxygenated blood except the pulmonary arteries. It have thick muscular wall containing elastic fiber. So you can see it. It has a thick outer wall. It has a thick inner wall. So with of muscles with elastic fiber. However, it has a narrow central tube which is called a narrow lumen. It has a narrow lumen, but it is made up of thick elastic what fiber, thick have thick muscular wall containing elastic fiber, and the function is it helps to withstand high pressure of blood and maintain the blood pressure as it recoils after the blood has passes through it. So you should take note, blood in the artery moves at a high pressure because it takes blood away from the heart at high pressure, and it does not contain valves. There is no valves because it moves in high pressure, so there is no backflow of blood. Now it has a narrow lumen. It has a narrow lumen. Why? Have a narrow lumen to maintain high pressure. That is it. A narrow lumen to maintain high pressure. So speed of flow in the arteries is actually fast. So let's look at veins. Veins carries blood at low pressure towards the heart, takes blood back to the heart at a low pressure, and veins carry deoxygenated blood, that is blood that are poor in oxygen, other than the pulmonary vein. So all veins carry deoxygenated blood except pulmonary vein. Now it has a thin outer and a thin inner walls with also elastic fibers. So have thin walls, have a large lumen. So you can see it has a large lumen. Why? As because blood move at a very low pressure. Now it contains valves. It contains valves, and the valves help to prevent the backflow of blood as it is under a low pressure. And in the veins, blood flows at is very slow. Then we have capillaries. Capillaries carries blood at low pressure within tissue cells, and they carry oxygenated and also deoxygenated blood. They carry oxygenated blood and deliver it to cells, and carry the deoxygenated blood out of cells and deliver it to what? Veins. So they have walls that are only one cell thick. The walls are one cell thick, and reason is so that substances can easily diffuse in and out of them. That's why it's one cell thick. It have leaky walls. Take note of this because when we look at lymphatic system, I'll explain this in detail. It has leaky walls so that blood plasma, the plasma is the liquid component of the blood. So the plasma is the liquid component of the blood, and because capillaries have leaky walls, some of this plasma content can leak out and form what is known as the tissue fluids surrounding the cells. So they leak out, forming tissue fluid surrounding the cells, and speed of flow is slow. So this tissue fluid is part of what will now be in the lymphatic system. Now, how capillaries functions? This is it. Remember we said it's one cell thick. So what it does is useful substances will diffuse from the capillaries into cells. Now, in this case, let's take glucose G, and carbon dioxide, and oxygen O will diffuse into the cells. Then the mitochondria in the cells will now use this glucose and oxygen to respire. Now, during the process of respiration, they will form water W plus carbon dioxide C. Now, the carbon dioxide is the gas; it's a waste product. So this waste product will now diffuse again from inside the heart out into the capillaries. So this path is oxygenated. Once the substance goes in, then as the carbon dioxide makes it now deoxygenated. So this deoxygenated part will now go into the veins, which will now carry it back to the heart. It gets oxygenated, oxygen gets added to it. It comes back through arteries, then back into the capillaries. So let's look at arterials and venous. Now, as arteries divide more, as they get further away from the heart, they get narrower. So once as they divide more, they get narrower. So this narrow path of the arteries are called the arterioles. So the narrow vessels that connect the arteries to capillaries are called arterioles. The same thing goes with the veins. Veins also get narrower as they move further away from the heart. So the narrow vessels that connect capillaries to veins are called the venules, arterioles. Now, shunt vessels. Let's see something called shunt vessels. Shunt vessels are vessels that connect arteries directly to veins without passing through capillaries. Take note. Shunt vessels are vessels that connect arteries to veins. So if this is the artery bringing blood towards the surface of the skin, in this case, we have shunt vessels here. They are used in control of body temperature through vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So sometimes the cardiovascular system needs to redistribute the blood to specific area. For example, during exercise, more of it goes to the working muscles and less of it goes to other body organs such as the digestive system. Now, when we are hot, more blood flow through the surface of the skin. When we are cold, less blood flow through the surface of the skin. Now, this redirection of blood flow is caused by the use of a vascular shunt vessels. Now, the shunt vessels can open or close to control the amount of blood flowing to the skin. Now, when we are cold, what happens is the shunt vessel become open. So more blood will now flow through the shunt vessels from the arteries directly to veins without passing through the capillaries. However, when we are hot, the shunt vessel will now constrict. You see here it opens, becomes wider, it dilates. While in this, when we are now hot, the shunt vessels will narrow, it will constrict. And once it constricts, that means more blood will now flow through the arterioles to the capillaries, and which to the surface, which will now lose heat through radiation to the environment to bring the blood back to its original temperature. Now, circulation around the body. Now, blood is carried away from the heart towards organs in arteries. Now, these narrow to arterioles and then to capillaries and pass through the organs. Now, the capillaries widens to venous and finally to veins as they move away from the organs. Now, veins carry the blood back to the heart. Now, there are different types of arteries. So you see here, we have the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. The aorta pumps blood to all other parts of the body. So you see the artery that delivers blood to the liver is called the hepatic artery. Then the one that takes blood away from the liver to the heart is called the hepatic vein. The artery that delivers blood to the small and large intestine is called the hepatic portal arteries, while the one that takes blood away from the stomach and small intestine to the liver is called the hepatic portal vein. However, the ones that delivers blood to kidney is called the renal arteries, and the ones that takes blood away from the kidney is called the renal vein. So the one that takes blood from the heart to the lungs is pulmonary artery, and from the lungs to the heart is pulmonary vein. So remember when we said all arteries carries oxygenated blood except pulmonary arteries. The same thing, all arteries do not contain valve except the pulmonary artery, which contains semilunar valve. Now, all veins contains valve except the pulmonary vein, which because the blood move, it carries oxygenated blood at a low pressure. It does not contain a valve. And all arteries, the aorta also contain a valve and is the largest artery in the human body. Now, lastly, on this part, we'll look at the lymphatic system. So, what is the lymph fluid? I tried to introduce it earlier when I said this is the blood delivered its content to the capillaries. Capillaries are leaky. That means plasma content can actually move out of the capillaries, forming what is known as a tissue fluid. So you see, tissue fluid returns to capillaries, though it flows and returns back to the capillaries. But however, the tissue fluids move inside what is known as the lymphatic body fluid or body system. So this is the lymphatic system. So excess tissue fluid drains into the lymphatic system, and these tissue fluids are what leak out from the capillaries. So the walls of the capillaries are so thin that water, dissolved solute, and dissolved gases easily leak out of them, pass through the walls from the plasma into the plasma is the liquid component into the tissue fluid surrounding the cells. Now, cell exchange materials such as water, oxygen, glucose, carbon dioxide, and mineral ions. Now, across the cell membrane with the tissue fluid surrounding them by diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. That is the process through which they exchange these sets of materials. Now, more fluid leak out of the capillaries. More fluid will leak out of the capillaries than is returned to them. And this excess fluid passes into the lymphatic system and becomes part of what is known as the lymph fluids. So quickly, the lymph vessels and lymph nodes. So you see, it's just what I'm trying to explain here. You see, this is the lymphatic capillaries. So they help to carry the excess fluid into the lymphatic system. Now, the lymphatic system is formed from a series of tubes which flows from the tissue back to the heart. So it flows from tissues back to the heart. It connects with the blood vessels near to the heart, where the lymph fluid is returned to the blood plasma. So the lymph nodes are small cluster of lymphatic tissues found throughout the lymphatic system, especially in the neck and the armpit region. So these small circular are called the lymph nodes. This small circular stuff, they are called the lymph nodes. You see them. So the excess tissue fluid flows from the through the lymphatic system, and it returns back to the heart. Here you see it moving and returns back to the heart. So each of these points here forms the lymph nodes. So large number of lymphocytes are found in the lymph nodes. So there's high concentration of lymphocytes, which is a type of white blood cells in the lymph nodes. That's each of these nodes around the body. Now, tissue associated with the lymphatic system, such as the bone marrow tissue, produce these lymphocytes. So bone marrow tissue produce lymphocytes, and large forms of lymphocytes are found in lymph nodes, and from there it's being added back into the blood plasma in the heart. So the lymphocytes play an important role in defending the body against infections. So remember I said it's a type of what? WBCs, which are white blood cells. So thank you. We're done with on chapter 2 and part 2. So part 3 is where we look at the blood itself and finish up this topic. So thank you for your time.